Hi, this is Dan Buller, retired electronics engineer. Out on the front deck of my houseboat again. I wanted to remind you that's where my swim ladder is. So the water is, it's like 46, 45 degrees, but in the summertime we can open that gate and go swimming right there. So that's really cool. It's 12 feet deep right there. So you're not going to hit the bottom. It's a great place. I want to talk about this has become Dan's story time, but I want to talk about a story out of my book, The Reluctant Road Warrior. And no, you don't have to buy it, but it's kind of fun. It basically highlights a lot of this travel that I did. I didn't talk about any of the things I did in the States, at least in the States at my home. Okay, so when I was in San Jose, I had to go to Westinghouse and Baltimore. And Baltimore, oh my God, Inner Harbor. Oh, I was there for like 2 weeks. Those guys were hilarious too. Westinghouse, you know the name, right? So I was at Westinghouse and they were testing electronic chips there, and this was years ago. This was in like the 1980s or something. And so they were testing electronic chips, and I checked out their machine, and the hard drive was clogged up. The air filter was all clogged up, and that's back in the days when they drew in outside air to cool the hard drive while it spun, and the filter clogged up. And I said, hey, you guys really ought to get that filter changed, And well, the guy I was there to cover for, he was on vacation, and I told him, when he comes back, tell him to get that filter cleaned out, replace that filter. It's called an absolute filter. It filtered way down to like 1 micron or even less, because if you get any debris in the hard drive, it'll rip the hard drive to shreds. So they told me, it's like, forget it. Well, I had given them one of my programs for making a backup. It was very complicated. You had to unmount the hard drive, and if somebody was using it, you had to wait. Then when it unmounted the hard drive, it would start up the mag tape, and it would rewind it, and then you would start recording on the mag. It was complicated. So they didn't clean the hard drive, and so down the road, they called me up on the phone. They said, how do you restore that backup you made? I'm like, what happened? All you have to do is run option 3, which is restore the backup, and you're good to go. You just put the tape on there, and it even knows which tape you're talking about. If it says, that's not for the right hard drive, so it would do everything. It was huge. It was a huge program. It was like version 256 of what I was working on, and it would do everything, which is good because it was a very complicated process to get to the right step, and you could blow it any time. But anyway, they didn't clean the filter. They ignored me, and guess what happened? Their hard drive crashed. And so he was asking me how you restore the backup that I had made months ago when I had showed up for a replacement to replace the guy for 2 weeks. So he destroyed the hard drive. Anyway, that was another story. But I had this customer, and it was really wild. It was fucking wild. It was Chromatic, which was bought up by ATI, and you probably know about ATI. They probably made the graphics chips in your PC or your Mac. ATI is up in Canada, and this was an American company, though, in San Jose. So I was assigned to go down there and talk to them, and go with the salesman, and we would talk to them about all the stuff that they were doing, and could they use our tester? And so I went down with the sales guy, and Mark Faust, who's now an associate professor up here in PSU. And we met the customer. His name was Doug, and nice guy. And it was Chromatic, so they had it was incredible. They had fresh fruit. The soda machine was free. You didn't have to put any money in. They would just tell it what soda you wanted. It would give it to you. And at 7 o'clock in the evening, they had a catered dinner. So if you stuck around till 7, you could come in at 9, stick around till 7, and you get free dinner. And it was really a great place. And Doug was a really nice guy. And they had I think it was an Agilent 83,000. I forget what it was, but I think it was an Agilent 83,000. And it was water cooled. And so Doug, we ran into Doug as he was coming back from the hardware store. He had bought a bunch of hose for this Agilent that had popped a hose and it spewed water all over the test floor. And so we were kind of teasing Doug about that a little bit. But Doug, he was a really nice guy. And we decided that, okay, Credence would pay to do a development on their chip. It was a Rambus-based graphics accelerator. And it did 3D and all that stuff. And it was all in one chip, right? And Doug's was representing the team that developed the chip. They did all the design on it. So I was working with them to do the development on it. Well, they didn't know if they wanted to buy a a Credence Duo or whatever it was, Quartet at the time. So I was going to do the test program development for this Rambus chip, right? Now the Rambus was way outside the range of the Credence VistaVision or Vista Duo or Vista Quartet, whatever it was. They're all based on the same thing. It was too fast. But they thought they could skip the Rambus test. Believe it or not, they thought they could skip the Rambus test and just have us do the video, especially the video. And so the video was analog, right? So we used an ACP to capture the video pins, RGB, red, green, blue, and we would use our digital to drive it at a relatively low speed, but we'd go as fast as we can because we couldn't go any faster, and Rambus was faster. So I decided I was going to develop a test program, and we had this guy, Bob Hale. This is a long story, I'm sorry. We had this guy, Bob Hale, who was kind of a nut, and he was going to do the design of the load board. It was very complicated because it was very high speed. So I learned a lot of my high-speed design stuff from Bob in an inadvertent way. I really wasn't involved in the design. He did it. But when he got it done, we got a hold of Doug to say, hey, can you come up and back us up on the load board design? We want to have you go through it, review it with us, make sure we didn't forget anything. And so Doug's like, cool, free trip to Portland, Oregon, and in the wintertime. So he brought his skis. He got on the plane with his skis. He checked his skis on the plane. And so when he got up here, he had his skis in the rental car. And on a Friday, he showed up on a Friday. And we're like, cool, okay, we can do this review on Friday, and then you can go skiing on the weekend. It's great. Well, there was a little problem. It got really cold overnight. Not last night, that night. And so what happened was lots of people's pipes froze, including Bob Hale's. So Bob Hale's pipes froze. And so he showed up. He actually showed up and said, I can't be at work today because my pipes froze and I'm going to have to dig them up and replace them and stuff. And Mark Faust was like, Bob, are you fucking crazy? The customer's on his way. He's on the plane. In fact, the plane is in the air right this moment. We can't call him up and say, go back, So the guy was on his way. And Bob's like, no, I have to go home. And so Mark offered to hire it out. Bob's like, nobody's touching my pipes. So we're like, God, Bob, you can't go away because Dan doesn't know anything about this load board design and Doug is on his way up, but we don't want to waste his time. Oh, no, I have to go back and work on my pipes. Like, oh my God. Most unhelpful son of a bitch I ever worked with. So I told Doug, I can do it. I'll try to do it. I'll do my best. I'll do what I can do. I've never done a load board review. I don't know what he wrote the book on this high-speed design stuff. I don't know. But, I'll go through it with him and we'll see what we can do. So Doug showed up and it was a nice meeting and everything. We talked to him. And then Doug and I got started working on this load board design and going through doing a review, and so we took the schematic and pin by pin, we went through the schematic to make sure it followed the right route, it was the right impedance all the way down. It had to be, was it 75 ohms? I think it was 75 ohms. And so it was a right impedance all the way down. We got everything, we went through it. But the problem was, he could sort of tell that I wasn't really familiar with it, but it was okay, you know. And he was like I said, he was a nice guy. So we took him out to lunch, and then we went back to work and worked on it, and we did a lot of made a lot of progress, but we didn't finish it. So Friday night we took him to dinner, and then he went back to his hotel. The next morning, Saturday morning, I had to go to work because I had to work with Doug to help get this done. So we were working on it Saturday morning. Mark actually showed up on Saturday morning. The building was empty, nobody around. And so we were working on it. We finally got it done. We were happy that it was good. Guess who walked in the fucking door? Not Bob Hale, the CEO of Creedence Corporation, and his wife. So he was showing his wife around on a Saturday, showing her all the different buildings. And he just happened to walk in our building. And we met the CEO and his wife while we were working with a customer. The customer was really happy to say hi and, you know, talk to him and tell him what a great job we were doing, even though I was, you know, I didn't know a goddamn thing about this stuff, but I had learned a lot in the last day and a half, you know. So we took Doug to lunch, and then off he went to go skiing, you know, for whatever he could do. Because Mount Hood is only like a couple hours away from Portland. So he could go skiing for a couple of hours, come back, go back to bed, and then fly home the next day. So it was all going to work out. Meanwhile, we'd never heard from Bob Hale, so that was okay. He showed up on Monday. He's like, hey, you got my pipes fixed. Well, whoop-de-fucking-do, Bob. Anyway, so we kept working on it, and it was really interesting. It was a really interesting thing. There was a PSRR test in there, power supply ripple rejection. And so I had to stimulate the part with a sine wave and on the power pin, and then look at the analog output pins, RGB, red, green, blue, for the video. So I had to look at the power pin, or the output pins, and look at what they were doing and do an FFT on it. And you know what their power supply ripple rejection spec was? It was like 70 dB. You know what the actual result was? 0 dB. So they were kind of surprised. They had to go back to the drawing board on that one. But, you know, that's the kind of stuff that I did, right? So I wrote this program, and it worked, and yeah, their part didn't do it. So they had to redesign the DACs and stuff. But anyway, so we got it done, and they took it and they looked at it, and, you know, they thought about buying a Creedence VistaVision or VistaDuo or Vista Quartet, whatever it was, and they decided against it. But that was okay, you know, no problem. You know, I mean, that's what we do. We put effort into it, and if we don't pull it off, oh well, no biggie. Nothing gained, nothing lost, right? So time went on, and I did other stuff, worked for other people and worked on other things. And then down the road, we had a SemiCon West coming up. SemiCon, big show. You've seen the video. I've done the video. SemiCon was great. I had a really good time. You know, you got to drink a lot on the company's dime. You got to eat really good food. You got to sleep in a nice hotel. You know, it was great. Except this time, they made me sleep with another guy, and I don't want to sleep with another man. You know, so I swear to God, I slept in my rental car. So he had the hotel, and I used the rental car. Oh well. But we had a nice time, and I was put in charge of reading people's passes because you didn't want the competitors slipping in to the show. And the show, I think they featured, I think it was Creedence. They hired Creedence, whatever was left of Creedence in the 1990s. So great, Creedence. You know, we had a good time. And so I'm sitting there reading these people's passes to get in, and you know, making sure that they're valid. And here comes Doug. I'm like, son of a bitch, hey Doug, how you doing? I haven't seen you in years. And he's like, Dan, hey, is your boss here? And I'm like, yeah, he's here. And I said, well, come on in. So I had to go with him. He wanted me to go with him. I'm like, okay, I'm abandoning my post, but you know, no big deal. So I went with him, and we found my boss, and he was talking to somebody else, and Doug like shoved him out of the way and says, hey, I wanted to talk to you about Dan. Dan's the best apps engineer we have ever had, period. And we never bought one of your testers. So he was great. Now, there's another story that goes with that. This was after I did this. Think about this. And this is after I did this to him. So I was working with Doug on designing this thing. And the PSR test, I told him, look, I can't generate the vectors for this. You're going to have to generate the vectors. Somehow you're going to have to get this made. So he started looking into it. He finally got this Korean guy to develop the vectors, because it's Rambus. It wasn't simple. So he developed the vectors. Boom. He gave them to me, and I did the PSR test, and it didn't work out good for them because it was 0 dB, but it didn't work out good for them, but it worked out okay for me. But how did we get those vectors made? I told Doug straight up. I had the Stingray at the time, and I still lived in Beaverton. So I talked to Doug, and I says, hey, Doug, you know, if you don't give me the vectors, I have nothing to do. So I think on Thursday I'm going to take the crew out, the crew in the International Apps Division, and I'm going to take them out on my boat, and we're going to go have some fun. It was unlawful what I did. But, I mean, that's how you play the game. That's how you play the game in apps. And that's what I did. That's the stuff I did. But anyway, that's the kind of stuff I did, and that's all, well, not all of it, but a lot of it's in here. Reluctant Road Warrior. And so that's some of the pictures of what I was doing. And let's see, there I'm in my white tux. That's me in my white tux. So anyway, once again, this is Dan Bullard from the river. See ya.